on day one, we're going to stop the transgender lunacy.
As I watched Donald Trump win the 47th presidential election, there was just one question on my mind as a transgender person. What will happen to me? It's no surprise that in the last 2 years, we have seen unprecedented anti-transgender legislation proposed across the country, mostly from Republican-led states. Additionally, a massive part of Donald Trump's presidential campaign has been undeniably anti-transgender, spending more money on anti-trans advertisements than issues like the housing market, economy, and immigration. It's clear this does not look good for transgender Americans. But what exactly will Donald Trump's presidency change, and what should trans people do now to prepare? In this video, I'll examine what exactly Donald Trump has proposed concerning transgender Americans and how likely those changes are to happen. I'm gonna stick to concrete policies and statements rather than guessing about what's gonna happen in the future. Full disclosure, I am not a political expert by any means. I'm just a concerned transgender person living in the US. I've seen a lot of social media posts talking about this upcoming Trump administration, saying that they're gonna ban HRT, transitioning, or kill trans people. I wanna especially go over that and determine throughout this video whether or not that's actually true. To do so, we're gonna take a look at Agenda 47, Donald Trump's official manifesto of policies that he would like to accomplish during his second term as president. Many columnists have described Agenda 47 as a form of fascist policies, more extreme and cruel than his first term as president. Most of these policies rely on an executive order. In simple terms, an executive order will allow Trump to bypass Congress, directly codifying something into law. Most modern presidents have done at least one executive order, and they're usually highly controversial. I'll be referring to Agenda 47 a lot in this video. Now, let's finally talk about the first policy that Donald Trump proposes for transgender Americans under his new administration. Trump plans to sign an executive order, quote,
instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age.
He also wants Congress to, quote,
permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures.
So what does that all mean? This would restrict gender-affirming care and federally funded programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and Planned Parenthood. It could also halt federally funded research on transgender care. As a result, HRT could become much more expensive, which is awful considering how many transgender Americans live in poverty. Even private insurance companies often base their policies on what the government does. So, while not all insurers will follow, many could stop covering gender-affirming care as a whole. With all of that said, it's important to clarify that HRT will not be overall banned, at least for adults. I've seen a lot of people panicking about an adult HRT ban, and I just wanted to clarify that that is not what is being proposed. They are instead making gender-affirming care harder to get. Whether or not a blanket ban is something on the horizon is yet to be seen. In the meantime, here are a couple websites where you can receive legal, informed consent gender transition care through non-federally funded means. This is not an ad, and I personally know transgender people that use both Folks and Plume. Both websites will be linked in the description. It's highly unlikely that they'll stop providing HRT under the upcoming Trump administration. In general, whatever your current method of receiving gender-affirming care is, the most likely outcome is it will just become more expensive. Now, with that out of the way, let's move on to the second proposed policy for transgender Americans: a full-scale gender-affirming care ban for minors. Donald Trump has blamed schools for changing children's genders numerous times, despite there being no recorded evidence of a school assisting a child's gender transition. Like, at all. Not once. He would like to, quote,
stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. Can you believe this?
Now, in the video, he directly mentions puberty blockers and any forms of surgery, though minors don't typically get gender transition surgery. He also states that doctors and physicians that participate in, quote,
the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately.
The implication here is that gender-affirming care is mutilation, which it just isn't. Puberty blockers are completely safe and have been used for decades for a variety of reasons in both trans and cis youth. However, I assume there will be more specific wording used on an actual proposed policy to single out gender-affirming care for transgender people. Additionally, Donald Trump threatens civil rights violations and the elimination of federal funding for any teacher or school official that, quote,
suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body.
Because of the vague wording, it's reasonable to assume that this would extend to any mention of transgender people. I imagine this would also impact the jobs of transgender professors and staff in educational roles. What's interesting about this specific promise is he promises to direct the Department of Education to carry this out. However, he just recently announced that he will be shutting down the Department of Education. So I'm honestly not really sure what the plan is here. Nonetheless, this is a promise policy. I figured I would include it in the video. It's impossible to make sense of everything Donald Trump says, as I'm not even sure he fully understands what he's talking about. No surprise, of course, considering he's almost 80 fucking years old. The last policy that Donald Trump proposed concerning trans minors specifically is that he will, quote,
protect the rights of parents from being forced to allow their minor child to assume a gender which is new and an identity without the parent's consent. The identity will not be new, and it will not be without parental consent.
In other words, if a minor privately expresses to someone in a school that they are transgender, schools will be mandated to reveal that to that child's parents. Obviously, this has horrifying implications if that child has unsupportive parents. The wording here is so evil, too, as if parents should have to give consent for a child to identify how they choose. It's not a parent's choice. If you want to talk about medical and physical changes, that's one thing, but a 17-year-old high schooler should not have to have someone else's approval to use, different pronouns. Parents should never take autonomy of a child's identity away from them. So, will Donald Trump ban gender-affirming care for minors? Yes, he will, and he has the power to do so on day one of his presidency through Agenda 47. Despite the fact that puberty blockers are completely safe, despite the fact that no school has assisted in a child's gender transition, doesn't matter. I'm honestly terrified to imagine how this will affect our youth, given that we know for a fact that transitioning saves lives and improves mental health in trans minors. If you're a transgender American between the ages of 13 and 17, I just recently turned 20 myself, and I've been doing this content thing since I was a closeted trans kid during the last Trump presidency. So I get it. I'm sorry that the adults of today have, quite frankly, failed you. That said, let's move on. The third major policy concerning transgender people that Donald Trump promises is to ask Congress to pass a bill that, quote,
the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth.
General understanding of this is that trans people will no longer be able to update their gender marker on federal documents such as their passport. The federal government will also no longer include X as a gender designation on passports and stick to only M and F for male and female. It may also be the case that transgender Americans that have already updated their documentation to reflect their gender identity may be forced to revert those documents to the gender that they were assigned at birth. However, the specifics of what this policy will actually include is very unclear, to say the least. Assuming this even passes in Congress, the best case scenario is that trans people will no longer be able to update their gender marker on federal documents like their passport. Worst case scenario is that trans people will be forcibly legally detransitioned, forced to revert all of their documents, such as their passports, birth certificates, and even driver's license. However, I highly doubt this will be the case, especially given that modern-day Republicans have this big focus on states' rights. Currently, only 4 states bar residents from changing their gender marker on official documents, but I wouldn't be surprised if this number grew during the next administration. There is no benefit, by the way, for anyone for this policy. Just taking away independent freedoms that have been allowed already and have had no negative impact in any way. This only stands to appease transphobic rhetoric, and it may not even actually happen when Trump is in office. Next promise Donald Trump proposes is much less of a policy and much more of an order. He plans to order the Department of Justice, which he has previously accused Joe Biden of weaponizing, to do an investigation into, quote,
Big Pharma and the big hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transitions in order to get rich at the expense of vulnerable patients, in this case, very vulnerable. We will also investigate whether Big Pharma or others have illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers, which are in no way licensed or approved for this use.
In other words, an investigation will be done into whether or not medical transition is safe. First of all, it is. But second of all, on a surface level, this actually sounds like a good idea. There is a massive lack in research on transgender health. However, I doubt this investigation will be done in good faith. Since we don't have any further details, we'll just have to wait and see. In this segment, Trump makes a very misleading claim that puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy aren't approved for use in transgender individuals. I assume he's referring to the FDA's approval process, which hasn't explicitly labeled these treatments for transgender people specifically. However, puberty puberty blockers and HRT are widely used off-label for gender-affirming care, which is a practice endorsed by like a ton of major organizations. These organizations support their use based on the evidence that suggests that they can relieve gender dysphoria and improve mental health in transgender individuals. The potential ramifications of this investigation are pretty scary. Despite being approved by many national and international organizations, if the Department of Justice finds that HRT supposedly has any negative long-term side effects, there is a world in which American HRT is outright banned for trans people. This is obviously pretty scary to think about and would just lead more trans people to use illegal pathways to receive their care, just like with abortion in many states in the US. This investigation feels less like a genuine inquiry and more like a scare tactic to delegitimize trans healthcare. We all know that none of these policies are about improving the safety of HRT, protecting trans people, or anything like that. The eradication of transgender people is the right's ultimate goal here, and has been for some time. We challenge their narrow perspective on the world and traditional value system. Average conservatives see trans women as horrible predators that want to invade women's spaces, and if they see trans men at all, they see them as innocent girls incapable of making decisions for themselves. They believe we are mad, and according to Donald Trump,
under my leadership, this madness will end. Thank you very much.
Since I started writing this video, there's actually been a major update that I wanted to add. On December 4th, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments for United States v. Scarametti, which aimed to challenge Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming healthcare for transgender youth. It's expected that the Supreme Court will uphold the ban, cementing every state's ability to ban gender-affirming care for transgender youth. When speaking about this case, prominent conservative political commentator Matt Walsh had this to say.
We are not going to rest until every child is protected, until trans ideology is entirely erased from the earth. That's what we're fighting for, and we will not stop until we achieve it.
Like he said, and like I said before, they do not want to stop here. They will not stop coming for our rights, and they are open about the fact that they want us gone. So where does this leave us? If you're trans and watching this video asking, what can I do? I wish I had better answers for you. Reality is that Trump's presidency will probably make life harder for transgender people. If you're able to, you can take steps to prepare by refilling your prescriptions early, saving up for potential out-of-pocket expenses, and updating your gender markers. Right now, the most important thing we can do as trans people is to look out for one another. And if you're not trans and watching this video, you can look out for us too. Find, build, or join a community, whether in person or online or both. Share resources, and if it doesn't exhaust you, stay informed about what's happening. No matter how many laws they pass, no matter how many times they try to erase us, they cannot change one fundamental truth. We exist. We will always exist, and we're not going anywhere. So I guess in conclusion, will they ban HRT? No, it looks like it'll get more expensive, and it will be banned for minors. Will they ban transitioning altogether? No. And will this kill trans people? Probably. I hope I was able to educate just what's going on, what's happening. There's been a lot of fear-mongering going on online, and for good reason, but I think it's important to stay updated on like what's actually happening, what's actually being informed, and I hope I was able to educate at least one person watching this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one, which will hopefully be more positive, but I don't know. We'll see. Bye.